Welcome to Next Gen Tech, Talent and Trends by Sequoia Connect, the space where we explore, with clarity and purpose, the real impact of talent, technology, and artificial intelligence on organizations.
We are Silva, and today we invite you to reflect with us on the decisions shaping the present and future of the IT industry.
Here we don't just discuss headhunting, AI, or tech consulting. We discuss what truly drives people, the need to grow, adapt, and lead.
This episode is for you if you're ready to take control of your career, lead change, or learn something new. Let's get started.
So to kick off this deep dive today, I want you to just imagine for a second that you just spent, I don't know, millions of dollars building this absolutely state-of-the-art smart headquarters for your company.
Oh, wow. Okay, setting the stage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. The lighting, the security cameras, the climate control, all the servers, it is all totally interconnected.
Right.
And it's perfectly automated, right? Controlled by this super sleek little app on your phone. You walk in, and it honestly feels like you're living 10 years in the future.
Sounds pretty ideal, honestly.
It does. But then, one Tuesday morning, the startup that actually makes that sleek little app just goes bankrupt.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and they turn off their cloud servers. So now you are standing in your multi-million-dollar headquarters, the temperature's dropping, it is pitch black, and you literally cannot turn on a single light because, well, the physical switches were bypassed during the renovation.
That is a total nightmare scenario.
You don't actually own your building anymore. You basically just rented access to a dashboard, and now that dashboard is completely gone.
Yeah, and that vulnerability, that exact feeling of being helpless, that's the precise precipice where we find Javier and Elena today in our deep dive.
Yes, the CEO and CTO from our source material.
Exactly. I mean, in our previous discussion about their journey, we watched them guide their entire company through this massive psychological hurdle, right? They successfully cured their workforce of what they called replacement anxiety.
Which was huge. That was that really visceral, paralyzing fear that artificial intelligence was basically just arriving to automate them out of a paycheck.
Right, yeah, the grim reaper of jobs. But they managed to upgrade the company's human OS, so to speak. They shifted the whole internal culture. So employees actually started viewing technology as an amplifier of human capability.
Which is a massive victory. I mean, you would assume that after pulling that off, they could finally just take a breath,
Yeah.
let the new culture settle in and just watch all the productivity metrics climb.
You would think so. But honestly, resolving that emotional panic, it really just cleared the battlefield for a completely different kind of crisis, a highly aggressive structural one.
Right, because now they're standing dead center in what the sources call the vendor storm.
The vendor storm. And honestly, it is an unavoidable market reaction.
Oh, 100%.
The second a mid to large scale enterprise signals to the broader ecosystem that its workforce is culturally ready to adopt AI, the floodgates just violently open.
Oh, I can only imagine Javier's inbox.
Oh, it's a disaster. The sheer volume of these aggressive enterprise software pitches is staggering. It's just a relentless barrage of vendors peddling what are essentially black box proprietary tools.
Black box meaning you can't see how they actually work.
Exactly. And the value proposition is always framed around this sort of effortless magic, right? Like, hey, just deploy our proprietary interface and your entire customer success team becomes obsolete. Or, purchase our closed ecosystem and your supply chain will literally route itself autonomously.
It's the seductive promise of the magic bullet.
Right.
Like, just pay us this hefty monthly licensing fee and our software will handle all the messy complexity for you.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Elena, the CTO, she's fielding a different, but I'd argue equally dangerous kind of pitch.
What's she getting hit with?
She is getting totally bombarded by companies offering these massive enterprise-wide AI training programs.
Okay, training sounds good on paper, though.
On paper, yeah. But during a recent IT advisory session, she actually took a hard look under the hood of these training modules, and she discovered this massive hollow core.
Hollow in what way?
Like the curriculum is entirely surface level. I mean, it basically consists of tutorials on like how to generate a stylized digital avatar for your Slack profile.
Oh, wow.
Or learning exactly which specific sequence of buttons to click to auto-generate some generic slide deck. It's just parlor tricks.
So Elena basically categorizes all of this, the magic bullet software and the superficial training, as just catastrophic noise.
Absolutely. She sees it as noise because her observation cuts to this really fundamental distinction in how we adopt technology. All these vendors, they're exclusively teaching the what.
The what? meaning just which buttons to push.
Right. They instruct a user on what specific button to press within their own proprietary user interface to get a prepackaged result, but they deliberately obscure the how and the why regarding the actual underlying machine learning models that are generating that result.
They hide the actual engine.
Exactly. And Elena identifies this as the seed of what she calls strategic collapse.
Okay, I want to pause right there and actually challenge that phrase, strategic collapse, because I mean, it sounds almost apocalyptic, right?
It's a strong phrase, yeah.
Right. And if a vendor build a great tool that, say, saves my team 20 hours a week on building slide decks, why does it really matter if my team understands the complex neural network architecture underneath it?
Because of the dependency it creates.
But look at it this way. I have no idea how the transmission in my car actually works, right? But I can still drive it to work every single day without a problem.
So why is a lack of deep AI understanding a threat to the entire company's strategy?
Okay, the car transmission analogy is really tempting, I admit. But let's look at the actual architecture of these AI software vendors hitting Javier's inbox.
Okay, let's look at them.
The vast majority of these startups are what the tech industry calls wrapper companies.
Wrapper companies. Yeah. They do not own the underlying foundational AI models. They do not have billions of dollars invested in compute infrastructure or server farms.
So what are they actually selling?
They are literally just taking a foundational model from, say, OpenAI or Anthropic, wrapping it in a specialized, pretty user interface, and charging Javier a massive premium just for the convenience.
Oh, I see.
So if your company relies entirely on that wrapper, your competitive advantage is totally non-existent because any of your competitors can just buy the exact same wrapper.
Right, there's no unique moat there.
Exactly. But it gets worse. You are essentially trapped in an economic hostage situation. What happens when that little startup burns through all its venture capital funding and decides to hike your subscription fee by 400%?
Wow, yeah. You either pay the ransom or your entire operational workflow just disintegrates because your team only knows how to operate that specific vendor's dashboard.
And that right there is the strategic collapse Elena is terrified of. You surrendered your company's operational intelligence to a black box.
You essentially outsourced the thinking.
Yes. If that vendor pivots or goes bankrupt, like in your smart home example, or gets acquired by your biggest competitor, your team has zero foundational knowledge to fall back on.
They're back in the dark building.
Exactly. So Alina realizes that to build genuine agility, her company cannot just accumulate more software licenses. They need to build what she calls agnostic foundations.
Meaning they aren't tied to one specific tool.
Right. They need the internal capability to orchestrate the raw intelligence themselves, regardless of who makes the model.
Okay, that makes the danger of the black box super clear. I get the wrapper problem. But let me push back a little on her rejection of those shallow training modules we talked about.
Okay, go for it.
So we established earlier that the workforce just barely survived replacement anxiety, right? They are skittish. They're nervous.
Very nervous, yeah.
So don't those quick, low-stakes tutorials, making a fun image or having it write a polite email, don't those serve a real purpose?
In what way?
Well, lowering the barrier to entry by letting people just play with the technology seems like a totally necessary psychological stepping stone. Like, why shut that down so aggressively?
That's a fair point. And look, lowering the barrier to entry is definitely valuable for, the first 48 hours of adoption.
Just to get their feet wet.
Right. The danger arises when the organization treats that parlor trick as the ultimate destination of the technology.
Oh, I see. When the training just stops there.
Yeah. If you hand a remarkably powerful tool to a highly skilled professional and tell them its primary function is to summarize a meeting or write a generic email, you are inviting a highly destructive psychological backlash.
And this leads into the sabotage epidemic mentioned in the sources.
Exactly.
This is the idea that employees aren't just, casually ignoring the new tools, but they are actively derailing the implementation across the company.
Right. And the sabotage we see in these environments, it's rarely this ovate, pitchfork-wielding rebellion. It is actually a highly rational, predictable reaction to what they perceive as an insult to their professional dignity.
An insult to their dignity. Give me an example of how that plays out.
Okay, let's look at a really concrete profile. Consider a senior logistics director. This is someone who has spent 15 years mastering all the insane nuances of global supply chain variables.
Right, so they're dealing with, navigating port strikes, fuel cost fluctuations, seasonal demand spikes. Really complex stuff.
Exactly. High-stakes, complex reality. Now, leadership announces a mandatory enterprise-wide AI initiative, and this veteran director has to sit through a 2-hour seminar where a slick vendor demonstrates how the new AI can write a generic vendor outreach email in the style of Shakespeare.
Oh, man. I can literally feel that logistics director's eyes rolling from here.
Right, because the director perceives absolutely zero structural value in that. They honestly feel patronized.
Yeah, like, I manage global shipping routes, and you want me to play with a chatbot.
Exactly. The technology is instantly categorized in their mind as a frivolous toy, entirely disconnected from the heavy, complex reality of their actual job. And consequently, they start passively sabotaging the rollout.
How so? Just by not logging in?
Not logging in, sure, but they also delay implementation in their department. They dismiss the tool in budget meetings. They explicitly tell their junior staff not to waste time on it.
Wow.
Yeah, the transformation dies not from fear, but from contempt.
That is fascinating. It actually reframes that whole Luddite narrative entirely.
How do you mean?
Well, we often use the term Luddite today to describe someone who is simply, afraid of new technology or too stubborn to learn.
Right, like an anti-tech reflex.
Yes. But historically, if you look back, the original Luddites were actually highly skilled textile artisans. They didn't smash the automated looms because they were afraid of gears or mechanics.
Why did they smash them then?
They smashed them because the factory owners were using those machines to bypass standard labor practices and produce really cheap, inferior products. So they were essentially protesting the devaluation of their deep expertise.
Oh, that is a profound historical parallel.
Right. Because when we hand a superficial AI wrapper to a veteran logistics director and say, look, it writes emails, we are essentially asking them to operate a cheap loom that produces inferior work.
I love that analogy. The rejection is totally rooted in a desire to maintain the integrity of their work. But the friction here, it actually goes even deeper than that.
Deeper than the logistics director.
Yeah. The sources reveal that it isn't just the non-technical staff rejecting the rollout. Even the actual engineering departments, the people who natively speak Python, Java, and C++, are hitting a massive wall.
Wait, really? How does a senior software developer, someone who literally builds complex digital architecture for a living, struggle to get value out of an AI model?
It seems counterintuitive, right? But it's because traditional software engineering and generative AI orchestration operate on entirely different paradigms.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, a traditional coder is trained in deterministic logic.
Deterministic logic, meaning predictable.
Exactly. If X happens, execute Y. The programming language is essentially a series of microscopic, rigid commands. The developer controls every single variable. But large language models, LLMs, are probabilistic.
Probabilistic, so they operate on probabilities, not strict rules.
Right. They do not understand strict syntax in the way a traditional code compiler does. They understand semantic relationships across massive, multidimensional spaces.
Okay, so if traditional coding is like giving step-by-step driving directions to a blindfolded driver.
Yes.
Like, turn the steering wheel 14 degrees left, depress the accelerator 2 inches. If the driver hits a detour that wasn't explicitly accounted for in the code, the car just crashes. The system halts.
Exactly. Generative AI, on the other hand, requires you to stop micromanaging the steering wheel entirely and start communicating with the entity driving the car.
Oh, okay.
The sources call this the language of intent. It is the specialized vocabulary required to articulate complex goals, constraints, and contextual boundaries to a probabilistic reasoning engine.
So it's basically like managing a highly competent, albeit slightly unpredictable chauffeur.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You get in the back seat and you don't say, press the gas pedal. You say, my intent is to arrive at the international airport by 5:00 p.m.
Right. You give them the destination.
And then you give the constraints. Like the constraints are that we cannot use toll roads and the ride must be exceptionally smooth because I am drafting a fragile document in the back.
And then the context.
Right. The context is that it is currently rush hour, so factor historical traffic patterns into your route selection.
Right.
And then the chauffeur dynamically calculates the probability of various routes and just executes the task.
You nailed it. But the current failure point across the enterprise is this massive communication gap.
Because the humans don't know how to talk to the chauffeur.
Precisely. The machine, the chauffeur, is astonishingly capable. But the human operator lacks the fluency to articulate high-fidelity intent. So the traditional coder is sitting in the back seat, yelling at the chauffeur to turn the wheel exactly 14 degrees.
And the logistics director thinks the chauffeur is only capable of playing the radio.
Yes. The potential of the machine remains entirely locked behind the human's inability to speak the right language.
Okay, so how do they fix this? To break out of this deadlock, bypass the predatory vendors, and actually cure this sabotage, Javier and Elena initiate phase 3 of their strategy, right?
Yes. Phase 3, mastering agnostic foundations and intent-based engineering. This is where they literally rip the vendor logos off the initiative entirely.
Which is a bold move.
Very bold. But they recognize that tying their training to a specific brand, whether that is OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, or Microsoft, is a massive strategic error.
Because the interfaces are always going to change.
Yeah, exactly. The user interface will change, the market leader will change, but what remains constant is the underlying logic of how a transformer-based neural network actually processes human instruction.
So that's what being tool-agnostic really means.
Right. It means training the workforce on the universal mechanics of probabilistic generation. If an employee learns this foundational logic, their skills become highly portable.
They aren't trapped in the wrapper.
Exactly. They can apply the exact same architectural thinking to ChatGPT on Monday, Gemini on Tuesday, and some custom internal model on Wednesday.
Okay, the sources emphasize a transition from simple prompting to architectural intent or intent-based engineering. Let's really unpack the mechanics of that for the listener.
Let's do it.
If I'm an employee trying to adopt this agnostic logic, how do I actually stop typing basic questions into a chat box and start engineering intent? Like, what does that architecture actually look like under the hood?
Okay, so a standard prompt relies on the AI to fill in massive contextual gaps using its base training data, right? Which is what often leads to generic or hallucinated results.
Right, it just guesses what you mean.
But intent-based engineering treats the instruction as a rigorous schematic. It's designed to radically narrow the model's probability distribution. And a well-engineered intent schematic always contains 5 distinct pillars.
Okay, 5 pillars. What are they?
Persona, context, task, constraints, and output format.
Persona, context, task, constraints, output format. Okay, let's run a simulation to show how this works.
Perfect.
Imagine I am a mid-level manager, and I need to inform my remote team that the company is transitioning to a hybrid model, requiring them to be in the physical office 3 days a week.
A very common, very tricky communication.
Right, so a basic flawed prompt would just be, write an email telling my team we are coming back to the office 3 days a week.
Okay, and if you input that, the model is going to scan its latent space for average corporate communications regarding return to office mandates.
And average usually means bad.
Very bad. You will receive an email laden with corporate jargon, totally devoid of empathy, and entirely misaligned with your specific team culture. It is a total failure of intent.
Because I didn't drive the chauffeur, I just let him guess.
Exactly. Now let us apply the architectural framework. We begin with first pillar, persona.
Okay, the persona. So I am basically assigning the AI a specific role in its latent space. Let's say, act as an empathetic but decisive operational director who values transparency and direct communication.
Good. By explicitly defining the persona, you have mathematically shifted the model's attention away from generic HR corporate speak and toward the vector space containing high-quality, empathetic leadership communication.
Makes sense.
Next is context. The AI has absolutely no memory of your company's history unless you provide it.
Okay, so context. Our team has operated fully remote for 3 years. Productivity remained high, but cross-departmental innovation has really stagnated. Leadership believes physical proximity is required to rebuild collaborative momentum. The team will likely feel frustrated by the loss of flexibility.
Excellent. You have just provided the structural reasoning and anticipated the emotional friction.
Now the task.
Right, the task.
Task. Draft a formal email announcing the new hybrid policy requiring Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the physical office, effective the 1st of next month.
Simple and clear. And now, crucially, the constraints. This is where you build the guardrails to prevent the AI from generating unwanted material or hallucinating.
The boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay, constraints. Do not use the phrases synergy, new normal, or unprecedented.
Yes, kill the jargon.
Acknowledge the disruption to their personal routines immediately in the opening paragraph. Do not offer any apologies for the decision, but emphasize that we will cover commuting costs for the first quarter.
That is fantastic constraint engineering. Finally, the output format. You must structure the delivery of the data.
Output format, a 3-paragraph email. The second paragraph must contain a bulleted list outlining the logistical changes.
Now look at the delta between your initial prompt and that engineered intent.
It's night and day.
Right. The first was a coin toss. The second is a high-fidelity instruction that locks the model into a deterministic-like reliability.
It almost can't fail.
Exactly. When you teach an entire workforce to structure their critical thinking through those pillars, persona, context, task, constraints, and output format, you secure the output. You eliminate the hallucinations.
And you build a repeatable, scalable process that is entirely independent of which vendor's logo happens to be on the interface that day.
Precisely. That is the essence of being tool agnostic.
Wow. I really see the power of that logic. You are essentially teaching employees how to think systematically about their own communication and workflows.
Yes.
But here is where the concept scales into something bordering on science fiction in the sources.
Oh, the multimodality?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the sources point out that mastering this text-based intent is merely the prerequisite for the true paradigm shift. Multimodal mastery.
Right.
Because we generally tend to visualize AI as a glowing text box on a screen, right? We think strictly in terms of typing words and reading words.
Which is such a limiting view.
But Phase 3 demands that the workforce conceptualizes AI across a full spectrum of sensory inputs. We are talking vision, voice, real-time data analysis, and image synthesis.
Yeah, the text box is a relic of the early adoption phase. The models operating in the 2026 landscape are natively multimodal. They do not merely read anymore. They see, they listen, and they speak.
It's incredible.
And to build a resilient AI culture, leadership has to train the workforce to orchestrate all these senses simultaneously.
Okay, let's bring this to life with the operations manager example from the sources, because this totally blew my mind.
That's a great case study.
Right. We previously discussed that logistics director who felt insulted by the email writing trick. Let's look at how multimodal mastery fundamentally changes their actual operational reality.
Okay, put yourself in their shoes.
I am a manager running a massive distribution warehouse. Historically, identifying a physical bottleneck, let's say a pileup of forklifts at loading dock 4, that required a very analog process.
Extremely analog.
A supervisor had to physically walk the floor, observe the blockage with their own eyes, radio the control room, look at a static inventory spreadsheet, and manually formulate a rerouting plan. The latency between the problem occurring and the solution being implemented could literally be hours.
It is a highly fragmented, slow workflow, but multimodal mastery allows that manager to collapse that latency to zero by layering the AI's sensory inputs.
How does that actually work?
Well, the manager leverages the vision modality first. They connect the AI to the live security camera feed overlooking loading dock 4.
So the AI is literally watching the dock.
Yes. The model's computer vision neural network is continuously processing the pixel data, and it's natively trained to identify the semantic meaning of a forklift and a pallet.
So it knows what it's looking at.
It is actively watching the physical space. Simultaneously, the manager connects the AI to the enterprise's real-time inventory management database. That is the data analysis modality.
Okay.
So the AI is now actively cross-referencing the physical reality on the camera feed with the digital reality in the spreadsheet.
Unbelievable.
And then the manager applies that agnostic logic we just talked about, the intent-based engineering, to write the core orchestration rule.
The logic that ties the senses together.
Right.
Let's draft that intent. Context. You are monitoring dock 4 for traffic flow. Constraints. No more than 3 forklifts should be idle in the loading zone at any time.
Perfect.
Task. If the vision modality detects 4 or more idle forklifts for duration exceeding 2 minutes, immediately cross-reference the inventory database to locate the nearest dock with 0 idle traffic.
That is brilliant orchestration. And then the manager deploys the voice modality for the final output format.
Oh, right. Output format. Synthesize a human-sounding voice alert and transmit it directly over the floor supervisor's radio frequency, detailing the bottleneck and providing the exact rerouting instructions.
Just think about what you built there. The architecture is breathtaking.
It really is. The AI sees the physical bottleneck form on the camera, analyzes the spreadsheet to find an empty dock, and literally speaks to the human supervisor over the radio to solve the problem in real time.
We have completely bridged the digital, physical, and auditory realms.
But I want to pause here and emphasize a really critical dependency. That warehouse manager, who likely does not have a master's degree in machine learning, was only able to build that multi-sensory automation because they first mastered the agnostic logic.
Exactly. That is precisely the point Elena is driving home to her company. The cameras, the databases, the voice synthesizers, those are merely the hands and eyes of the system.
Right.
The human manager is the central nervous system. If that manager had not learned how to engineer intent, how to define the constraints, the context, and the specific trigger conditions, they would have absolutely no way to instruct the AI to connect the visual data to the tabular data.
The Agnostic Foundation is the universal glue that binds all those modalities together.
It is. The human provides the structural intent. The machine just executes the sensory processing. And this fundamentally shifts the role of the employee from a passive software user to an active architect of intelligence.
I love that phrase, architect of intelligence.
Yeah.
But to be an effective architect, you have to understand the materials you are working with, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like if you're going to orchestrate logic across all these different modalities, you really need to know which specific AI engine is best suited for the task at hand.
Which brings us perfectly to the necessity of mapping the landscape. Javier and Elena realized that an agnostic workforce must understand the comparative advantages of the different foundational models available to them.
Right, because not all models are created equal.
Not at all. And the sources provide a really detailed breakdown of the 2026 AI roster, examining the specific architectural strengths of the top 4 models.
Let's dissect this roster, because this is where the theory of being tool agnostic meets the actual reality of enterprise execution.
Let's dive in.
The first model highlighted on the roster is ChatGPT version 5.5, which the sources designate as the master of agentic orchestration.
Yes.
So what fundamentally distinguishes an agent from a standard chatbot? Like, what does agentic actually mean?
It's a huge shift. A standard chatbot is strictly reactive. It waits for you to type a prompt, it generates a response, and then it stops. It goes back to sleep.
Right.
An agent, however, operates with a degree of autonomy. It is capable of taking a high-level goal, independently breaking that goal down into subtasks, and then autonomously using external tools to accomplish those tasks without asking for permission at every step.
Wow. And ChatGPT 5.5 is optimized for this.
Heavily optimized. Under the hood, the model is natively trained to generate specific JSON code blocks that trigger API calls to other software.
Okay, translating that into enterprise reality. If I give ChatGPT 5.5 a complex objective, it can actually leave the chat interface, execute actions in other software programs, and then report back to me.
Exactly. Let's consider a customer service scenario. An angry client calls your support line. ChatGPT 5.5, utilizing its real-time voice modality, converses verbally with the client.
Okay.
The client mentions a specific obscure error code. Without requiring a human agent to intervene, the agentic model autonomously opens the company's internal CRM database, searches for that client's specific history, queries the separate technical documentation database for the error code, identifies the solution, and verbally communicates the fix back to the client.
All in real time.
All within milliseconds. It is the premier model for dynamic, multi-step problem-solving in chaotic real-time environments.
So it is essentially the ultimate autonomous field operative.
That's a great way to look at it.
But the sources contrast that dynamic, chaotic flexibility with the second model on the roster, Anthropic's Claude version 4.5.
Yes, Claude 4.5.
They label Claude as the pillar of constitutional logic. Now, the term constitutional implies a very strict, almost rigid framework. How does that architecture differ from OpenAI's agentic approach?
The distinction lies entirely in the training methodology. Most models out there are aligned using what's called reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Meaning humans tell it what's good or bad.
Right. Human testers rate the AI's responses to teach it what is helpful or harmful. But Anthropic pioneered constitutional AI, which relies heavily on reinforcement learning from AI feedback.
AI feedback, how does that work?
They provide the model with an explicit written constitution, basically a set of immutable principles regarding logic, safety, and harmlessness. During the training phase, the model is actually forced to critique its own outputs against this constitution and revise them before they are finalized.
Oh, wow. So it has a built-in automated self-correction mechanism based on rigid logical rules.
Exactly. And as a result, Claude 4.5 exhibits superior, almost human-like reasoning when dealing with incredibly complex structural logic.
So you wouldn't use it for the angry customer.
No, you would not deploy Claude 4.5 to dynamically chat with a chaotic queue of customers. However, if your engineering team needs to generate high-fidelity C++ code for the braking system of an autonomous vehicle.
Where a mistake means a crash.
Exactly. Or if your legal department needs to draft a zero-defect, multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, Claude is the absolute gold standard. It prioritizes precision and structural integrity over dynamic creativity.
It is the model you choose when the cost of a hallucination is catastrophic.
Perfectly said.
So we have the dynamic agent, ChatGPT, and the rigid logician, Claude. The third model introduces a completely different architectural breakthrough.
Yes, Google's Gemini.
Right. Google's Gemini version 3.1 Pro is categorized as the multimodal reasoning giant, primarily due to a feature called infinite context, boasting a context window of over 5 million tokens.
5 million, it's staggering.
But to understand why this is revolutionary, we need to clarify what a context window actually is, and frankly, the computational nightmare of expanding it.
Okay, so think of a context window as the model's short-term working memory.
Okay.
When you input text, the model converts the words into numerical representations called tokens. Historically, models had very small working memories. If you fed them a really large document, by the time they analyzed the end of the text, they had effectively forgotten what was at the beginning.
Right, they lose the plot.
Exactly. It is a limitation of the attention mechanism in the neural network architecture. Calculating the mathematical relationship between every single token requires exponentially massive compute power.
So scaling that memory without the model just losing focus, what they call the needle in a haystack problem, is one of the hardest engineering challenges in artificial intelligence.
It is. But Google achieved a massive breakthrough with Gemini 3.1 Pro, allowing it to hold over 5 million tokens in active memory simultaneously with near-perfect recall.
Okay, to conceptualize 5 million tokens for the listener, what does that actually look like?
Imagine taking your enterprise's entire software code base, every single line of code written over the last decade.
That's math.
Add to that the complete library of all your technical documentation.
Yeah.
Now, because Gemini is natively multimodal, meaning it processes video frames directly without having to transcribe them into text first.
Oh, wait.
You can also upload a 3-hour video recording of your lead engineers debating the system architecture on a whiteboard and just dump it into the prompt.
You inject the entirety of the company's historical and visual context into the prompt all at once.
Yes. And then you apply the agnostic intent framework we learned. You ask the model, based on the legacy architecture in the code base and the strategic goals outlined in the video, identify the 3 most likely failure points if we migrate our database to the new server infrastructure next month.
And it can do that.
The model analyzes the massive, multi-hour, multimodal dataset as a single cohesive thought. It is an unparalleled capability for deep organizational analysis.
That is just staggering analytical power, which brings us to the final model on the 2026 roster. And frankly, this is the one that represents the biggest temptation to slide right back into the black box we were trying to escape.
Microsoft Copilot.
Microsoft Copilot. The sources label it the Enterprise Integration Powerhouse. Now, it doesn't claim to have the 5 million token memory of Gemini or the constitutional rigidity of Claude. Its power lies entirely in its location.
Right. Copilot's distinct advantage is actionable orchestration. It is deeply, fundamentally integrated into the Microsoft Graph API.
What is the Graph API?
The graph is basically the underlying nervous system that connects every single piece of unstructured data in a Microsoft enterprise environment.
So every Teams chat.
Every Teams chat, every Outlook email, every PowerPoint presentation, every Excel spreadsheet. Copilot sits natively on top of this graph, equipped with these specific security permissions of the user.
So if I'm an executive, I can tell Copilot, look at the budget spreadsheet I was sent yesterday, cross-reference it with the project timeline discussed in yesterday's Teams meeting, and generate an email to the department heads outlining the scheduling conflicts.
And because Copilot already lives inside the ecosystem, it executes the action instantly.
Now let me play devil's advocate here because the temptation is overwhelming.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
I am an enterprise leader looking at this landscape. Managing the nuances of OpenAI's agents, Anthropic's constitution, and Google's massive context windows? It sounds like an administrative nightmare.
It is complex, yeah.
Right. So if Microsoft Copilot is already woven into the software my team uses 8 hours a day, why shouldn't I just mandate Copilot across the board, train everyone on that single interface, and ignore the rest of the roster? It seems infinitely more efficient.
Choosing that path of least resistance is incredibly tempting, but let us return to Elena's fundamental warning about strategic collapse.
The black box trap.
Exactly. If you mandate Copilot exclusively, you are willfully blinding your organization to the broader spectrum of intelligence. You are artificially capping your team's capabilities to align perfectly with Microsoft's specific developmental priorities and weaknesses.
You are putting the entirety of your operational capability into a single vendor's basket, which is exactly the trap we spent this whole deep dive trying to escape.
Consider the operational reality of that choice. Copilot is phenomenal for internal data orchestration, yes. But what happens when your legal team encounters a problem requiring the zero-defect logic of Claude 4.5?
They can't do it.
Or what if your engineering team needs to analyze a 4 million token repository using Gemini? If your workforce only knows how to click the friendly Copilot button, they are entirely unequipped to leverage the necessary tools.
They only know the what, not the how.
Right. An agnostic culture trains employees to act as master craftsmen. A master carpenter does not attempt to build an entire house using only a hammer simply because it was the easiest tool to reach on the belt.
That's a great point.
They assess the architectural requirement of the task and select the specialized tool that offers the highest probability of success.
And because Javi and Elena focused on the underlying logic, the intent-based engineering their workforce isn't intimidated by the interface of a new model.
Not at all.
The syntax of the prompt might change slightly from tool to tool, but the logic of persona, context, task, constraints, and format remains absolute.
They are fluent in the language of intent.
Right, which allows them to fluidly switch between ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini as the mission dictates.
And the true validation of this agnostic strategy is witnessed in Section 6 of the sources. The ripple effect.
The ripple effect, let's talk about that.
When you shift the workforce from being passive consumers of an interface to active orchestrators of logic, that cultural resistance we discussed earlier, the sabotage epidemic,
Yeah, the angry logistics director.
it just evaporates. Fear and resentment are totally replaced by autonomous innovation across departments that traditionally have absolutely no background in software development.
Let's examine the specific evidence of this ripple effect, because it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The sources highlight an incredible transformation within the finance department.
Oh, the risk engine.
Yes.
Historically, if the head of finance identified a need for a complex dynamic risk simulation engine to model market volatility, the process was excruciating, right?
Extremely slow and expensive. They would have to draft a massive 100-page business requirements document. They would submit it to the IT department, where it'd languish in a backlog for like 6 months.
And then what?
Eventually, the company would hire an external vendor for $500,000 to build a rigid black box software tool that was functionally obsolete the day it deployed.
Classic enterprise procurement cycle. But the Agnostic Foundations completely dismantled that bureaucratic pipeline.
How so?
The finance head, possessing deep domain expertise in market risk, utilized their mastery of intent-based engineering to build the engine themselves.
Without writing code.
They didn't write traditional code, no. They orchestrated a solution pipeline. They might have used Gemini 3.1 Pro's massive context window to ingest a decade's worth of PDF financial reports and market data.
Okay.
They then utilized Claude 4.5's constitutional logic to generate the precise, error-free Python scripts required for a Monte Carlo simulation.
Wow.
And finally, they used Copilot to integrate those exact scripts directly into the department's existing Excel dashboards.
So a non-developer constructed a highly complex, multi-model software engine simply by articulating high-fidelity intent.
Yes. The barriers between the idea and the execution have effectively vanished.
And it isn't an isolated incident. The sources show the HR department utilized the exact same agnostic logic to build an AI-driven career pathing system, mapping employee skills against future organizational needs.
And the marketing department's evolution is particularly striking, too.
What did marketing do?
Rather than using the AI for trivial tasks like generating catchy headlines, which is what everyone expects them to do, they recognized the structural potential. They engineered a custom brand voice engine.
How did they build that?
By utilizing advanced constraint logic and few-shot prompting techniques. They provided the model with highly specific examples of the desired tone, creating an automated system that ensures every single piece of external communication adheres flawlessly to the corporate identity.
They turned the AI from a toy into a structural pillar of the department. And this brings us to what I believe is the most critical realization in the entire deep dive. It is a quote from Javier that really encapsulates the ultimate victory of their strategy.
Oh, I know the quote. It's brilliant.
He observes, "We didn't just buy a solution. We built an internal capability that makes us independent of any single provider.
They achieved true digital sovereignty. They fully escaped the tool dependency trap.
By investing in the human capacity to understand and orchestrate logic, they transformed the enterprise into a self-sustaining ecosystem of innovators.
The vendor storm continues to rage outside, sure, but it no longer affects them because they're no longer shopping for magic bullets.
They laid the philosophical and technical foundations, and now these brilliant, isolated successes are just springing up in every department.
But as is always the nature of enterprise evolution, solving one monumental challenge simply reveals the next frontier.
Naturally.
Phase 3 is a resounding success, but it leaves Javier and Elena facing a profound question of scale.
Because the challenge on the horizon is integration, right? You have a brilliant risk engine in finance, a sophisticated brand voice system in marketing, and a career pathing tool in HR.
Right, but they are isolated.
How do you take these isolated department-level innovations and weave them into a unified, massive enterprise architecture? How do you move from individual orchestration to industrial-scale reality?
That structural challenge is the core focus of Phase 4, scaling through AI-augmented co-creation, which we will explore in our final installment.
I can't wait for that one. But before we conclude today's analysis, the sources provide 3 community reflections, and I want to address you directly, the listener.
Take a moment to really map these concepts against your own daily reality.
The first reflection asks, have you ever felt locked in by a proprietary AI tool that overpromised and underdelivered? Have you experienced the frustration of investing significant capital and time into a solution, only to realize you are merely renting a rigid dashboard that limits your team's potential?
And the second reflection probes your internal capability. In your professional experience, what is the fundamental difference between knowing how to use an AI tool and understanding AI logic? When you sit down to solve a problem, are you acting as a button pusher, hoping the software provides the answer? Or are you acting as an orchestrator, engineering the constraints and the context to guarantee the outcome?
And the third reflection looks at your organizational culture. Which department within your company has been the most surprising promoter of structural AI adoption? Is it the technical teams, or are you seeing domains like HR, finance, or operations taking the lead?
Your honest answers to these questions are an accurate diagnostic of your organization's human OS. They reveal whether you are trapped in a vendor dependency cycle or actively building agnostic resilience.
This transition requires a profound cognitive shift. And as we prepare to delve into Phase 4, I want to leave you with a final, highly disruptive thought regarding the future of the professional landscape.
This is the big one.
If we are rapidly approaching a reality where non-technical staff can instantly conjure complex, multimodal software engines simply by articulating high-fidelity intent, what happens to the traditional concept of a job description?
The entire architecture of how we define a career begins to fracture.
It completely splinters.
Consider the implications. Historically, your value in the marketplace was heavily tethered to the specific software you mastered.
Right. You were the Salesforce architect or the advanced Excel analyst or the Python developer.
But when you master agnostic logic, you are no longer defined or constrained by a specific interface. You are defined by the quality of the intent you can articulate.
Which changes everything.
Your deep domain expertise, your capacity for critical thinking, and your strategic vision become the only limits on your output. Effectively, your mind becomes the true enterprise platform.
Your mind becomes the enterprise platform. That is a chilling and honestly exhilarating paradigm shift.
It forces us to entirely rethink how we recruit talent, how we structure training, and how we measure human potential in an age where the machine handles the execution.
It is the ultimate evolution of the workforce.
It really is.
This was Next Gen Tech, Talent and Trends. Thank you for joining us in this conversation where knowledge becomes direction. I hope this episode offered you a useful pause, a boost of inspiration, or even a starting point for what's ahead.
We hope to have left you with ideas, questions, and most importantly, the drive to keep building your path in the world of technology and talent. Leave us a comment, share this with your team, and help us keep growing the conversation.
Follow us on social media at Sequoia Connect. And remember, the future doesn't just happen, it's built with talent, technology, and purpose.
We're Silva, and we'll catch you in the next episode.